This story happened around 2009 or so, when I was 13 years old. I was home one winter day waiting for my friends to pick me up for a sleepover. I was with my older sister and my mother, who is handicapped. We were all just hanging around until we heard a knock at the door. My older sister, who is pretty brave, answers it. It's some disheveled meth head looking guy, who says he lives next door and asks could he shovel our snow for us. This guy looks like your classic, typical meth head. Sores on the skin, missing teeth, creepy eyes, shitty clothes. We say no, a little bit creeped out. He leaves and nothing happens for a bit. About 20 minutes later, we hear something outside. The guy is frantically shoveling our snow, despite us telling him no. We are all pretty creeped out at this point, but try to chalk it up to maybe a homeless guy wanting to make a quick buck. But why would he say he was a neighbor and do it anyway after we said no? I call my friend and tell her to wait and explain the situation, as I don't want to leave my sister and mom alone, just in case. My mom texts my dad and also explained it to him. We grab baseball bats and other forms of defense and hide out in the bathroom, waiting. I'm mostly scared because, as I said, my mother is handicapped, and even though she's pretty strong, she couldn't fend off a crazy meth head. Suddenly, we hear a very loud hanging from the front door, and freeze in terror as we realize it's the guy. My mom calls my dad and quietly asks him if he can come home from work because we are all very terrified. At this time, he worked about 25 to 30 minutes away, but said he was on his way. He's about 6 foot 3 inches tall and takes no shit from anyone. So we all felt safer knowing he would be home somewhat soon. The banging continues for a bit and then stops abruptly. My dad finally gets home and makes sure we are all okay. I went to a sleepover eventually, but after that, I was pretty paranoid for a good few weeks. Incidentally, I asked one of our neighbors who I went to school with, and this guy turned out not to live next door at all. We never heard from him or saw him ever again. Creepy meth head who shoveled my snow and banged on my door. Let's not meet again. A few years ago, when I still lived in upstate New York, something really freaky happened to me. If you've ever been in upstate New York during the winter, you would know that it snows a lot. I usually just spend snowy nights watching TV. I lived about a mile or so from any other house, and my roommate was out. Now, I'll be honest, being alone makes me feel uncomfortable. I've always had an overactive imagination, and a small noise can really freak me out. Like I was saying, my roommate was out, and it was snowing heavily. It was probably like 9 or 10 at night, and I was watching TV, like normal. All of a sudden, I heard a crunch outside, like someone stepping on ice. I immediately tensed up, and my mind raced to every possibility. It wasn't my roommate, since I didn't hear a car. I listened in horror as I could hear the crunches getting louder. I ran into my room and locked the door. I got out my shotgun and grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, just in case. I know it might seem like I was overreacting, but remember, this is at night, in heavy snow, miles away from any other house. Who could it possibly be outside? The footsteps just stopped at some point. I eventually fell asleep, and when I woke up, my roommate was back. I went outside to see if I could find any evidence of who was outside, and what I found still haunts me. I saw footprints in the snow, coming out of the woods and circling around my house. The footprints were filled in for the most part, so it was hard to figure out where they were going. The scary part of all this is that the footprints stopped, outside my bedroom window. The other footprints were filled in, but these were fresh, as if someone had been standing there all night, since the snow stopped early that morning. To this day, it still scares me. I don't know what kind of person would be out in those woods. The fact that while I was in my room, they were standing outside my window still freaks me out. I moved out of that house a few months later. This encounter is real and happened to me 6 years ago when I was 16. For context, I'm female. I live in New England, where the winters are very snowy, with long, cold, dark nights and short days. One such night in February, I was alone in my parents' house, which is in a safe, quiet, suburban neighborhood where the houses are within 100 feet of each other. My parents had divorced years before and were still on good terms, so when my mom decided to sell the childhood home, my dad bought it so I could continue living there. While in the process of moving, neither of my parents stayed at the house for a couple of nights, and only my room upstairs had furniture. The rest of the house was mostly empty, with boxes scattered about, and the internet had not been switched over, so I often sat at the far end of the living room and mooched off my neighbor's Wi-Fi. It was fun not having my parents there for a couple of nights, so I stayed up late with my new laptop and surfed the web into the early hours of the morning. During my second night of being alone, it snowed late into the evening, and I sat in a dark living room on a folding chair, with only my computer screen for light, the snow falling quietly outside. The neighborhood was silent, as cars don't usually drive by past 10 at night, and neighbors stay inside to keep warm. At 2:30 a.m., I decided to head off to bed, and was wrapping up my internet activities for the night, when I heard 3 very slow, quiet knocks on the front door, just a few feet away. I immediately closed my laptop, knowing that the bright screen made me visible to the person outside, since the windows weren't covered. I got off my chair and walked very quietly over to the door, and knelt down below a window to listen outside. Frozen with fear, I waited for what was probably about 2 full minutes when I heard 3 more identical knocks. They were very slow and would have been too quiet to wake up anyone who had been sleeping. I gathered the courage to look outside through the window and saw a dark figure standing very close to the front door, dressed in a black winter coat and black pants. A hood pulled over his head obscured his hair and face, and he stood still with his arms to his side. I contemplated calling the police, but decided to keep waiting. I moved back behind the door, away from the window, and after about 2 more minutes passed, I could see the man walking down the walkway, past the front of the house, leaving. Suddenly, he stopped, turned around, and looked directly at the window through which I had watched him. About 15 seconds passed as we stared at each other, but I couldn't see his face under the darkness of his hood. Finally, he turned around and walked down the driveway and down the street. He didn't stop at any other houses, just continued to walk down the street in the falling snow, and I watched him for about 10 minutes until he faded into the darkness. As far as I know, this hasn't happened since. I still live in that house, and occasionally have nightmares in which the scene replays itself, except that in the dreams, I open the door for him.